Queen Boudica, the Iceni Revolt. How one queen nearly crushed an empire, 6061 AD. What happens when an empire forgets that even the conquered have teeth? In the year 60 AD, Britain was still licking its wounds from Roman conquest. Roads were being paved, temples erected, and taxes collected with the enthusiasm of a pickpocket at a royal banquet. But beneath the polished marble and Latin inscriptions, something ancient was stirring. A queen, not just any queen, a mother, a widow, a warrior named Boudica, watched as her daughters were violated, her people enslaved, and her dignity stripped in public. Rome thought it had broken her. Instead, it had awakened a storm. This is the story of how one woman united tribes, defied an empire, and nearly drove the greatest military machine in history off the edge of the map. How did a widow with no army become the most feared enemy of Rome in Britain? Why did Roman veterans in Camulodunum die screaming in their own temple? What did the Druids do on Mona Insula that made Roman soldiers freeze in terror? And what happened at Watling Street that turned a rebellion into a bloodbath? From secret councils and supernatural omens to flaming chariots and wedge formations of doom, this is not just a revolt, it's a reckoning. So stay with us, because when Boudica rides, history doesn't whisper, it roars. Don't forget, subscribe now. It's the reign of Emperor Nero, a man known for fiddling while Rome burned and for having the emotional stability of a caffeinated squirrel. The Roman conquest of Britain was still fresh, barely a generation old. Think of it as the awkward honeymoon phase of imperialism. With conquest came Romanization. Roads, baths, taxes, and a flood of Roman immigrants who treated Britain like a fixer-upper villa. The local tribes, including the Iceni, were expected to smile politely while their traditions were bulldozed and their land was reorganized. Enter King Prasutagus, ruler of the Iceni tribe. He saw the writing on the wall, probably in Latin, and tried to play it smart. In his will, he named 3 heirs, his 2 daughters and the Roman emperor. A diplomatic move meant to preserve his family's status and gently fold the Iceni into the Roman Empire. But Rome doesn't do subtle. Instead of honoring the will, the Romans treated it like a coupon that had expired. They confiscated property, enslaved Iceni men, and raped the women. Even Prasutagus's daughters weren't spared, and when his widow, Queen Boudica, protested, she was stripped naked and publicly flogged. This wasn't just cruelty, it was humiliation, and it lit a fire in Boudica that would soon engulf Roman Britain. Boudica summoned the Iceni leadership and invited neighboring tribes, the Trinovantes, Cornovii, Durotriges, and more, who had suffered similar Roman abuses. In a clandestine meeting, they voted to unite under one banner and elected Boudica as war queen. No crops were planted that spring. Instead, the tribes forged weapons, stockpiled supplies, and prepared for war. The fields didn't grow grain, they grew vengeance. While this rebellion was brewing, Governor Paulinus was off chasing glory on Mona Insula, Anglesey, the spiritual heartland of the Druids. His goal? To crush the last bastion of Celtic resistance and score a symbolic win for Rome. But when his troops landed, they were met with a scene straight out of a horror movie. Druids in black, arms raised, chanting curses. Women with flaming torches screaming like banshees. A beach that looked like a portal to the underworld. The Roman soldiers froze, their weapons dropped, their brains short-circuited. Paulinus, ever the motivational speaker, screamed insults until his men snapped out of it and charged. They slaughtered the women, the Druids, and then realized the Druids were standing on a giant funeral pyre. One surviving woman lit the pyre. The beach exploded in flames. The Romans had just accidentally participated in a mass human sacrifice. Romans were deeply superstitious. They believed in omens, portents, and the power of foreign gods. After Mona Insula, strange reports began to swirl. The English Channel turned blood red. Ruins appeared under the Thames. Corpses washed up on beaches. A statue of Victoria, goddess of victory, collapsed for no reason. Were these real? Were they invented later? Doesn't matter. The Romans believed them, and they were rattled. This was the mood in the air when Boudica finally launched her revolt. Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, wasn't just any Roman town. It was the first Roman colony in Britain, a retirement home for Roman veterans who strutted around like they owned the place. Spoiler, they kind of did. The town was built on Trinovantes land, seized and handed to Roman settlers. It had a temple to Emperor Claudius, a literal shrine to the guy who conquered them. The locals were taxed to fund this temple. Imagine paying for the statue of the man who stole your house. So when Boudica rallied the Iceni and their allies, Camulodunum was the obvious first target. It wasn't just a city. It was a symbol of Roman arrogance. As Boudica's army thundered toward Camulodunum, messengers were dispatched in panic. Londinium responded by sending 200 unarmed slaves. That's not reinforcements. That's an insult with sandals. Longthorpe, bless them, took it seriously and sent 2,500 trained soldiers. But neither force arrived in time. Inside Camulodunum, a small group of Roman veterans made a heroic last stand at the Temple of Claudius, protecting thousands of civilians. But after a brutal siege, the temple fell, and what followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. What happened next was so horrific that even Roman historians, who loved a bit of gore, wrote with trembling hands. Civilians were hanged, crucified, boiled alive. Women were mutilated, their bodies desecrated in ways too grotesque to repeat. According to Cassius Dio, noble women were impaled after being tortured in ritualistic fashion. This wasn't just revenge, it was a message. Rome bleeds too. Governor Paulinus, fresh from his druid-slaying beach bonfire in Anglesey, got word of the revolt. He had 1 legion, 5,000 men. He scrambled to recruit every retired soldier who could still lift a sword, boosting his force to 10,000. He begged another legion for help. Their commander, the Primus Pilus, basically replied, "Nah, I'm good." So Paulinus marched to Londinium just as Boudica was closing in. Realizing he couldn't defend the city, he told the locals, "Evacuate or die." Thousands fled with him. Those who stayed were tortured, mutilated, and burned alive. The city was razed to the ground. Next came Verulamium, St. Albans, same story, same fate. 3 major Roman cities, gone. 80,000 Romans dead. The colonization effort was in ruins. Paulinus, now cornered with thousands of refugees, low on food and no reinforcements, made a decision: we fight here. He sent the refugees ahead and told them to keep walking west until they hit a new settlement near Wales. Paulinus gave a speech that Dio probably embellished, but the sentiment was real. Better to fall fighting than be impaled, boiled, or disemboweled. Let Britain be our monument. Picture it, a narrow valley flanked by forests, the perfect choke point. Paulinus, the Roman governor, had chosen his battlefield like a chess master setting his trap. He had 10,000 men, outnumbered nearly 20 to 1, facing a horde of up to 230,000 Britons too. But what the Romans lacked in numbers, they made up for in sheer, terrifying efficiency. As Boudica's forces surged forward, the Romans stood silent, eerily calm, like statues carved from granite. Then, at the perfect moment, they unleashed a storm of javelins. The Britons, charging with wild abandon, were impaled mid-run. The Romans hurled until their arms ached and their quivers were empty. The Iceni had no armor. Their shields were more decorative than defensive. It was like throwing darts at haystacks. Out of javelins? No problem. The Roman infantry formed into 3 wedge-shaped formations. Think of it like a trident of death. Paulinus knew they'd be surrounded. He wanted to be surrounded. The wedges allowed them to fight in multiple directions, slicing through the Iceni like a blender set to rage. The Britons tried everything: arrows, stones, javelins. They bounced off Roman shields like pebbles off a tank. Chariots? Boudica sent them in, but the Romans just tightened ranks, absorbed the impact, and kept moving like a phalanx possessed. This wasn't a battle, it was a grindstone. All day the Romans pushed forward, hacking, stabbing, advancing like a machine that ran on blood and discipline. The Iceni were exhausted, their enthusiasm curdled into panic. They tried to retreat, but ran straight into their own wagon train, a semicircle of spectators, families, and loot. It was a traffic jam of doom. Imagine 100,000 people trying to reverse into a cul-de-sac while being chased by berserk legionaries. And then, snap, the dam broke. The Romans charged into the crushed mass of humanity. They didn't care who was in front of them. Man, woman, child, horse, goat, wagon wheel. If it moved, it died. The battlefield turned into a butcher's yard. Boudica escaped, but only briefly. She took poison days later, choosing death over capture. 80,000 Britons dead, including non-combatants too. Romans claimed only 400 dead and 400 wounded. Sure, Gen Brome immediately sent 6,000 reinforcements to Britain, just in case Paulinus had missed a spot. Emperor Nero briefly considered abandoning Britain altogether, but that idea died faster than his political career. Instead, Rome doubled down. They built forts, drained Iceni lands, enslaved survivors, and turned the rebellion's ashes into a warning etched in stone. The Romans would stay in Britain for another 300 years, but they never forgot the queen who nearly drove them out. Paulinus was hailed as a hero. The legions earned honorific titles like Marcia Victrix and Valeria Victrix. The Iceni, their lands were ravaged, their people enslaved, their culture buried beneath Roman roads and Latin inscriptions. She didn't win, but she made Rome bleed. She made emperors panic, and she became a legend. If you ever visit London, look for her statue near Westminster Bridge. Boudica in her chariot, hair wild, eyes blazing. She's not just a queen, she's a warning.